neither party in the last few decades has really seemed intent on constructing a dominant majority coalition and getting things done. Because once they get into office, they have narrow majorities. They don't really pursue policies and ideas and visions that would expand that majority. Then the other party gets in, they have a narrow majority, and then people hate them. And so it goes. Well, hello out there in podcast land. Welcome to yet another edition of the Liberal Patriot Podcast. I'm your host, Rui Teixeira, and I'm coming at you every couple of weeks with the very finest and heterodox conversation and analysis with the most interesting and stimulating guests. And today, I'm pleased as punch to have Zaid Jilani. Zaid is a fellow at New America. He's a journalist based in Atlanta, and he's worked as a staff reporter at News Nation, The Intercept, Alternet, and Think Progress, which was part of the Center for American Progress. So back in the day, we were colleagues, right, Zaid?
Yeah, we were at the Center for American Progress together. I mean, that seems like
What
ages ago.
What was our
now,
overlap? Yeah, it was ages ago. What were your years you were there?
I was there from 2009 through through the beginning of 2012. So it must have been 2.5 years about.
Right. Yeah. No, I overlapped with a lot of people because I was there from the beginning until I left in 2022. So as you know, there's a massive amount of turnover at CAP. But at any rate, so we have that in common. And Zaid has been published in outlets ranging from the New York Times to Unheard to Fox News. And I gather as a New America fellow, you're doing a big project in Georgia. We're going to want to hear about that. And then I really want to recommend Zaid's Substack, the American Saga, which is available for all you people out there in podcast land, and I highly recommend it. Very astute commentary about American culture and politics. And speaking of astute commentary about American culture and politics, let's just dive right into some of the latest missives you put out there. You had a good piece, I thought, the other day on fight the oligarchy. What's with that word? What's that about? What are they getting at? Do Americans even understand the word?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think this was a debate that was set off over the past couple of months because Bernie Sanders, highly recognizable name in American politics these days, went around the country with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who I think is becoming a more recognizable name in American politics. And, they've been barnstorming through all over the country, sometimes speaking to tens of thousands of people. I think something smart they've been doing is they've been going to GOP districts and talking about Medicaid because, the GOP may end up is actually targeting in their current version of the budget resolutions or budget bills, Medicaid. But they titled the tour Stop Oligarchy, right? And I think that's something that's turned into a lot of their messaging, not only at these rallies, but in online, digital space, within their emails and so on and so forth. And actually, some Democrats stepped forward and said, well, we're not 100% sure if that's the right way to say it. Like Lisa Slotkin, who's a Midwestern insider in Michigan, she said, well, look, I'm not sure everyone understands that word, oligarchy. I just say we shouldn't have kings in America, right? Everyone knows what a king is. The word oligarchy, it's interesting. It does have some history, I would say, in American politics, but not a ton, right? I think often, one thing I did in the post I wrote in my newsletter is I looked at, when were people searching for this term, right? And there was a huge spike in early 22. And what was happening in early 22 was Russia invaded Ukraine, right? And I think part of the way the West responded to that was by placing sanctions, not only on the Russian economy, but on particular people like industrialists who are highly tied to the government, who we refer to as oligarchs, right?
Right. Okay.
And so I think a lot of people were searching the word at the time because I think when a lot of even like well-educated Americans, I think when they think about oligarchy, they're usually thinking about like specific other countries, historical time periods, that sort of thing. So I did something else too. Like Bernie has been putting out emails where he talks about the oligarchy, right? Through his fundraising list, I'm on it. So I put one of those emails through what's called a readability formula, right? Readability formula is what teachers use often to see like what text they should give to their students. They want to know, is this like an 8th grade text? Is it read at like a 10th grade level? I had some training as a teacher. I tutor kids on the side. So this is something I'm interested in, right? So I put his text through a readability formula, one of the popular ones online, and it spit out basically, this is a college level email, right? Like college level people will understand what Bernie's talking about when he's talking about oligarchy and his other themes. And, I think a lot of people look at that and they say, well, what's the problem with that? Americans are adults who speaking to
Right.
adults. And I
Well,
think
I'm
Bernie
also
himself,
is
right,
that a bug or a feature for a Democratic email? I
right,
mean, their
right,
base is
exactly.
increasingly the
Yeah,
college educated voter.
exactly.
Yeah.
It may not be such a bad email for his email list. He's a prolific fundraiser. Everybody knows that. But a lot of the people who give money to like Democrats through fundraising email, they're going to be college educated people, right? They're going to be more plugged in, tuned people, well read people who pay a lot of attention to politics. Maybe they didn't know what oligarchy was 2 years ago before Russia invaded Ukraine, but now they use the term a lot. They know oligarch. So it might not be a bad email, but if you're spitting out, if it turns out that this is college level language, it does mean it's not going to be appropriate for everyone, right? And I think sometimes progressives, they get a little offended when you say something like that, because like even Bernie, who most of the time I think is a really good communicator. Like I don't think he's like a bad communicator. I think like he does connect with a lot of ordinary people. But even Bernie was like, when he was raised like Slotkin's criticism, he was like, well, I don't think Americans are dumb. I think they understand the word. It doesn't mean that you're dumb though, right? I think that's the problem with how progressives look at these language wars. They're like, well, if my latest terminology, if you're telling me that people don't understand it, they must be stupid, right? And we don't think they're stupid. We think very highly of the American people. And I analogize it differently. I think it's like going to your neighbor from El Salvador and speaking French to them, right? They wouldn't be stupid if they didn't understand what you said, right? It's just not. It's not the culture and language. It's not what they're immersed in, right? I would be the stupid one to try to speak French to them, right? And so I think of this the same way, right? Like I think that there are a lot of Americans who just, this language is not in their lexicon. Doesn't mean you should never use it. I think that for its fundraising list is probably very effective. I think for a lot of college educated progressives, they're really into making these analogies between the United States and other countries, which I think is part of where the oligarchy term comes in. But it does mean like if you are going door to door in like the Midwest ahead of the midterm elections, it's probably not the best language to use, right? I'll give you an example. I worked a DA campaign in Northern Virginia in 2000, and I think it was, I want to say it was 21.
Excuse me, what do you mean by DA? Just so.
Oh, I'm sorry, district attorney. So like actually they call it Commonwealth's attorney in Virginia, but it's basically a district attorney. It's like the head prosecutor in your area, right?
Okay.
And actually, I'm thinking I think it was 2019 or 2020 that I did this. It was a little bit earlier. And Northern Virginia is a super educated area, right? Like one of the most educated areas in America. And yet I noticed that some of our literature, it was just kind of like out of sync with how people were thinking about things. Like they talked about mass incarceration. I would show that to people and they'd be like, what are you talking about? Like we're Northern Virginia. They're like, we're not Alabama. Like it's like they in their mind, mass incarceration meant like racism and like Jim Crow and like massive civil rights abuses. And that's not really what was happening there.
Right.
But one of the things that was happening was the current incumbent prosecutor did end up penalizing a lot of like kids and people for like marijuana possession. That's something our candidate was against. So I just found out the number. I asked around and found out the number. And I was just like, look, I started going door to door and telling people like, look, this number of people have been like just locked up for having just a little bit of marijuana on them. Isn't that really messed up? Like, don't you think like kids shouldn't be that?
Hey,
and people related to that.
That's just wrong. Yeah, I mean, you kind of
exactly. People related to that, and I think at that point people were really in tune with what I was saying, and so like changing your language in order to appeal to more people is not really dumbing it down. It's not offensive. It's just like making sure you're speaking the right language. You're not speaking French to a Spanish speaker, right? And so I think that's a lesson that progressives, it's just really hard for them to learn though. Like, I feel like I tell this to people and they just get so taken aback and offended that I would even suggest to do that, right? They're like, no, we need to educate the American people. Like, we need to, if they don't understand something, we need to tell it to them. And it's like, come on, in political messaging, you often don't have a chance to do that, right? Like, you have a 30-second ad or you have like a Facebook commercial or like, you don't have time to put someone through a whole lecture or a whole class. People are busy. They're not interested in doing that much of the time. Maybe it's okay for me, someone who's like a nerd like me who reads books about politics all the time and sit down and learn concepts. But for a lot of average people, it's just not. It's not something they can do.
Why do progressives and Democrats have such difficulty here? I mean, it goes way beyond the examples we've just alluded to. There's a whole arcane vocabulary of the way you talk about a wide range of issues, from race and gender to immigration to crime to just there's a whole way that sort of the good people are supposed to talk about a lot of these issues.
Right.
I mean, you're not supposed to say illegal immigrants, but documented immigrants. You're supposed to say criminal,
Right.
justice involved individual instead of criminal. I mean, there's an
Right.
incredibly wide range of these bizarre locutions that, I mean, is it just virtue signaling? People feel like they need to use that language because they have to signal to the other people in their little tribe that I'm one of the good people. And, or is it just they're completely, I mean, they're the stupid ones. They're the idiots because they don't understand that people don't understand this. I mean, which is not,
Right.
if you thought about it for a few seconds and had some empathy for your fellow Americans, you might realize this is a questionable practice.
Yeah, I mean, look, sometimes changing your language to appeal to people, sometimes coming up with these new terms that stick. I mean, it can be effective at times if you're doing it with language that people already understand. So for instance, like I think one of the most effective branding exercises was when the GOP started calling certain laws right to work, right? Like who's against the right to work, right? Like that's great.
Right.
Or they call the
Brilliant.
estate tax the death tax, right?
Right.
Like,
Another.
so that's like menacing. Like, oh my God. Yeah, like the government's coming after your dad when he dies, or they want to tax you even in death.
Have they no shame? Yeah.
No, like, but the thing about like right to work and death is like anyone can understand it, right? Like it's very simple, right? And so like that kind of rebranding is great, right? But the examples that you brought up, Roy, like that the progressives often use, are just like, I mean, it's just so it's so esoteric, right? It's and I think the progressives are okay with it because they come from college educated circles. We're learning new terminology, learning new facts about the world, getting into arcane history. All that's part of your life. And it's like to be expected, and like you constantly want to be doing it. And also I think it's a facet of being inward looking, right? Because okay, I'll give you another example. So I did a fellowship at UC Berkeley, at Greater Good Science Center, which is an awesome place. Which does social psychology work, and I was working on a project on polarization. And one day when we had a conference, I worked from the East Coast, but I traveled over to Berkeley for the conference. We had a training, and you always have those annual kind of trainings, right? And there was someone there who was kind of like a diversity trainer, and like she went into all this nitty gritty and how you should use this language, not that language, and blah blah. And at the end, I asked her, "So, do you ever give these trainings to anyone who's not a liberal?" And everyone in the room laughed because I think they kind of got my point, which is like, I think sometimes liberals are constantly trying to make themselves like more liberal or like change something about themselves while they're ignoring the vast majority of the rest of the world, right? Which is like the vast majority of the rest of the world is not ready to like have 8 different terms for homeless, right? We're still trying to get them to be like, no, you shouldn't just kick people to the curb. You got to have some solution for these people, right? When a lot of people don't want to have any solution for those people, right? Like I volunteered at a homeless shelter outside Atlanta for many months, and like I never heard anyone use any of this terminology that progressives are obsessed with, but like we were every day we're just trying to make sure someone had a roof over their heads or got a job so they could get out, that kind of thing. Like we had very basic concerns. And I think if you're a liberal surrounded by liberals and all you do is talk about politics all day, you got to keep upping the ante, right? You got to keep changing your language, you got to keep altering your cultural approaches and blah blah blah. But the problem with me is like, the problem I see with that is like, it's okay as an intellectual exercise, but you're not going to make actual progress in the world doing that, right? Because so many people are not like that, right? That's only a minority of people who want to do all that. So
in a way, it's kind of like anti-political. It's not really about politics. If politics is the art and science of persuading people to support your position and getting as many people as possible, to back that position and winning elections. I think a lot of this is orthogonal to doing that, and people don't really care because that's not the goal. The goal is to be in with the in crowd. The goal is to excite the people who you're used to talking to, and so on. So,
and I think the level of polarization we have also is a little bit deceptive because like people will be like, okay, in 2020, after everything happened in terms of excessive progressivism, which I think you and I and many other people criticized, look, Democrats still won the election, but what do you mean by they won the election? I mean, because of the polarization we have in this country, yeah, maybe Democrats will win the 2028 election because Trump just screws things up in many areas. But you'll have a very narrow majority, right? And especially if you're a Democrat, Democrats have very ambitious ideas for the country. They want universal health care. They want, a broad expansion of labor laws and childcare and more funding for education. You really can't get a lot of that stuff with narrow majorities that only last a couple of years because you screwed up, right? And you alienated people, and then the other team came in, right? So I think, yeah, you're exactly right when you say it's anti-political, because if you're being political, you should be ambitious, right? You should want a massive majority, all kinds of people in your coalition, enough to get really
Yeah,
big
that's
things
right.
done, right? The more you narrow your coalition, the more you narrow your agenda, right? Like Biden got some things done, but I think a lot of things that progressives wanted to do that I think Americans would have been absolutely for, like universal child care, higher minimum wage. They
Hmm.
couldn't do those things because they didn't have enough people in under the tent to actually win enough seats to do those things and keep the power. So that was a problem for them.
Yeah, no, you're singing my songs, Ed. I obviously agree with all that. Well, speaking of Democratic cluelessness and not being quite, sort of figuring out this political puzzle here, you wrote another interesting piece recently called "Democrats Don't Need Kamala Harris." So, what did you mean by that, and what do you think they do need if they don't need good old Kamala to come back?
No, I mean, I think this is another thing, and people people like with some standing, I think, in the Democratic Party did not like some of the things I was saying about Kamala. Like I heard from people, and I think part
Hmm.
of that is like I the party has a habit of being deferential to leadership, and I think we saw that with Biden
Hmm.
as well, right? Like
Oh
a
boy,
lot
did
of
we see
like
that!
I mean, in
Yeah,
2020, there were people like Castro and Cory Booker, who had made some commentary about like, hey, I don't know if this guy's all together there. And a
yeah,
lot of
right.
Americans, like if you go to 22 or 21, even maybe you probably could even find polls in 21, but they were definitely around in 22, where they said, hey, we think Biden should just serve out his term, but
Yeah,
then he's passed the
he's
baton
too
to someone
old.
else.
He's too old. That just kept on going up. So yeah.
Right. And yet I think that Democrats are deeply uncomfortable with like questioning things about their leaderships, not just the ideas like you and I were discussing earlier, like some of the fads and things that they're deeply uncomfortable questioning. That they're actually uncomfortable with
Hmm.
questioning the leaders themselves. And I can tell you, as soon as Biden dropped out, all my like Republican friends were like excited. And it's like, wait, why were they excited? Because like Democrats were happy that Biden stepped down, right? He's too old and like, he has all these decline, and but they were all happy because they all just thought Kamala Harris was not up for it. And I never really heard
Hmm.
from anyone who was like an independent or a Republican that they thought anything about the Harris campaign was particularly compelling, that
Yeah,
she
yeah.
was
I
a
just
good
love
speaker
Kamala.
with strong
Right,
ideas,
right,
right?
right,
Like
right.
she kind of was engineered for like parts of the Democratic base, like people on the coast who were kind of like upwardly mobile, who
Hmm.
were excited about, breaking the glass ceiling for understandable reasons. But beyond that, I don't think she had any appeal. And I think she continues to not have any appeal, right? She's not like, sometimes there's candidates who lose elections, but like they brought forth a lot of interesting ideas and had a compelling narrative, and they kind of have staying power, right? Like we've seen that many times in American history. With Harris, I don't see that, right? And I think that she likely will maybe aim for California's governor's seat just because it's like a safe place where you don't really have to engage with Republicans very much. And you can just say every part of the Democratic coalition is great, which was kind of what her recent political speech was, right? She didn't say anything any Democrat was doing was wrong. She basically tipped her hat to every wing of the party and then just said, Trump sucks, which is, the bare minimum a Democrat can do.
Right,
But
right. Yeah, yeah.
that's not,
Trump sucks. Hmm.
that's not Obama in 2008, right? It's not a compelling vision. It's not a contrast that I think is going to galvanize people and attract also independents and people who are disaffected with politics. I mean, right now,
Hmm.
the polling shows Democrats are still slightly more unpopular than Republicans, right? Like even after Trump's like trade war against the entire world and things that made him more unpopular and him going too extreme on immigration in some ways and these things, even after all that, Democrats are still slightly more unpopular than Republicans. And
Yeah, and
so
actually,
I think,
Trump has been getting a little bit more popular lately, which is
I
weird,
mean,
but
I
there it
think the
is.
best
Yeah.
thing for the Democrats would be to not have a super strong like legacy party name on the ballot in 2028, right? Don't forget about the Bidens, the Clintons, the Harrises, everyone. Like bring forth a bunch of newer, younger people, people like my senators here in Georgia, people like Josh
Hmm.
Shapiro, like have them stand, bring out really cool original ideas and narratives and, this new, reset the party a little bit, right? And I think some Democrats are uncomfortable with that just because they're so loyal to their leaders, right? Like we always talk about Republican authoritarianism, and it's there. Like Trump has a cult of personality, but the Democrats, I don't think they have a cult around one personality, but they just like are very uncomfortable
Yeah,
with like
a
changing
cult
over
of
their
leadership.
people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Um,
they have a
mm.
almost like middle managers in a corporation or something, right? They're very loyal
They
to the
don't,
firm,
don't
right?
want to
Like
mess with the CEO and the
right.
COO and the board members. Yeah, yeah. I
Hmm.
think there's a lot of truth to that. Well, but it isn't a problem here that is not only just Democrats are excessively loyal to their current leadership, the big figures in the party, but also maybe people don't see the necessity of this kind of new approach you're talking about, because it gets to what you said Kamala's main theme was, which is just like Trump sucks. I mean, I think a lot of Democrats are convinced there's really not much more you need to do than to like sort of press the accelerator and accentuate that Trump does suck.
Right.
He's terrible. He's awful. He's an authoritarian. He's a fascist. He did this. He's going to destroy the country and Medicaid and the economy and the world. And so why do we need a new kind of candidate? Because all we got to do is stand up someone who's like a halfway decent campaigner, and then we're back in the clover. So in other words, just as Biden, overreached his mandate, right, and as Trump is kind of overreaching his mandate, even as we talk, I think the Democrats may overreach their, if I may put it this way, their anti-mandate, right?
Right.
Their sense that people are rejecting Trump. So now we have a clear lane back to power, because all we got to do is take advantage of the fact people don't like Trump. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I think there is some truth to that, just because of the level of polarization in America. There's a lot of ping-ponging in our elections. I expect Democrats will do decently well in the 2026 midterm elections. They'll retake House and so on and so forth, and they'll probably retain Georgia's Senate seat now that Kemp is not running. I think that all that's true, but like also gets back to like, what is your actual goal? Is your goal just to win the next election narrowly? Or is your goal actually a broad majority, a consensus of people that can actually get things done, right? Because really, like, Biden had a really hard time getting a lot of things done in Congress, right? Like, I don't know, maybe some people are really impressed with the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, I own an EV, so technically I benefited from it. So, I don't want someone, is gonna clip this and say Zad's a hypocrite because he's bashing the legislation he benefited from. But still, like, giving EV tax credits to upper middle class people and building out, infrastructure for EVs, that's something. But like, I don't know. I kind of thought Democrats ran on everyone should have decent childcare, a good school, access to the doctor, right? Like we need a higher minimum wage for low income people. None of that was accomplished. And the reason it wasn't accomplished is because the Democratic brand is just not that popular, right? It's popular enough to get you across the hump occasionally and actually win the election, but not with a large majority, not with a consensus. And a few months after being in office, your approval ratings suck again, right? Like, I think if Harris had won the election, she'd probably be a really unpopular president right now. And you and I would be talking about all the things she screwed up, right? Like, that's not where a political party should want to be. And I think the same thing goes for the Republicans. I think that eventually one of the two parties will eventually figure out how to calibrate correctly to build a large majority, like, to have like a Reagan style landslide and to also have Congress working with them effectively. I think the level of polarization we have in this country is largely downstream from just like how bad some of our like leadership is and how bad the politicians are. Like, they're just not the level and quality and caliber that they used to be. But like, if you can get to that, you will be able to accomplish a lot. And I'm not sure which party will get to it first. I am somewhat hopeful that like, if we can put aside some of the legacy politicians in the Democratic Party, and maybe if Republicans can find like a version of Trump that solves some of his personality problems, but is a little bit more savvy and calibrated, then maybe either of those two parties could get there. But like, first they have to recognize that problem, right? There's no point in like just narrowly winning an election just because the other guys suck, right? You want a compelling vision and narrative that's broadly inclusive to a big tent of people, to where they can all join with you in working on this project of the better America that you're trying to create. And the alternative is just like really like crappy politics that we've had over the past few years, where like party comes in, it's unpopular very quickly, basically doesn't accomplish anything. I mean, the Republicans, what are they actually going to do legislatively? They're going to have this tax bill, right? They're going to have their budget bill.
Big, beautiful.
They're probably not going to have anything else. And who knows what will even happen to the big beautiful bill, because their majority is so narrow that they can't actually put a lot of their priorities in there, probably because like people are going to peel off from the right, people are going to peel off from the center, and so like it's a mess politics as it stands now. And the only people who are excited about it are maybe the same people who are excited about Kamala Harris, right? Like the hardcore base folks, but like,
the hardcore,
not that many of them.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to plug my report with my AEI colleague Yuval Levin, called Politics Without Winners, where we made exactly this argument that neither party in the last few decades has really seemed intent on constructing a dominant majority coalition and getting things done. Because once they get into office, they have narrow majorities. They don't really pursue policies and ideas and visions that would expand that majority. Then the other party gets in, they have a narrow majority, and then people hate them. And so it goes, right? And so it goes. And I think the goal of politics or a political party, as you say, should be something much more ambitious. And I think it isn't clear at this point which party is going to be able to do that, which actually we should discuss the Democrats and their possibilities there for sure. But you wrote a very interesting article, I think, not quite a year ago, but close to that, about J.D. Vance and how the left doesn't get J.D. Vance. And I think that's a pertinent topic because he is, sort of the most plausible nominee in 28 for the Republicans. And he is, I don't know about you, but when I talk to people I know on the left and liberals, it's like, oh, Vance, he's even worse than Trump. Yeah. He's a clever fascist. Those are the worst kind to do. Did you see what he said about this in that podcast 4 years ago and so on? And they just don't seem to understand that he actually is pretty smart. And he could actually be the guy who sands off. I don't know if he can accomplish it. I mean, he's pretty deep in the weeds now because he's in the administration. He's got to defend what Trump does. But I just think it's interesting that there's not what I would call a high level of understanding about what the possibilities are here for the other side. And there's just a tendency to say after Trump, there will be nothing. We got clear coasting.
Yeah, there's a psychological bias called outgroup homogeneity bias or effect, which basically means that like our in-group, we have divisions, we're different, but the other side, they're all the same, right? Like there's no difference between them, right? And I think a lot of people maybe don't see the nuances in how someone like Vance would approach things versus someone like Trump, because Trump is effectively an opportunistic politician who is very much, built a cult of personality around himself. I don't think he has a deep conviction about most things. He's ideologically flexible on a lot. He has some themes certainly that resonated and that he's picked up and pursued, like immigration or like nationalism, tariffs, and so on and so forth. But I don't think he's deeply ideological. Whereas Vance is I think is kind of a very interesting and different creature in that way, in that I think that he actually is going through sincere ideological conversion as a consequence of events and also to some extent political necessity, because he obviously is a politician. But he is actually building, if you look at his communication, the way he talks about things and what he's interested in, who he reads, you kind of get a sense that he is kind of figuring out an actual coherent worldview. And that's something that maybe he would apply and pursue if he was a presidential candidate or the president, right? And I think, we talk a lot about the Democrats' weaknesses. The Democrats' biggest weakness, I would say, is that they don't connect as well with people who don't have college degrees, right? The Republicans' big weakness is that they don't connect with people who do have the college degrees, right? And I think part of that is Trump's manners. He's not super intellectual at all, and dumbs everything down that he says, which works for him in some cases and maybe not others. The threat of someone like Vance to the Democrats is that he could learn to kind of do both, right? He's a very well-educated person. He went from like a broken family through Ohio State, the Marines, and Yale Law, Senate, now vice president. He's obviously extremely like capable and polished in a way that I think Trump isn't, right? He's high aptitude in many different ways. Also, I think he's capable of being ideologically moderate strategically when he wants to be, right? And also just like expressing human emotions. I think that Trump doesn't. I recall a moment during the vice presidential debate, which I think shocked a lot of Democrats because they had this caricature of Vance in their minds, where Waltz was talking about, I believe it was a classmate or someone he knew who had been experienced a school shooting. Right. And Vance stopped the debate. He stopped the debate and said, God, I didn't know anything like that happened to you. I'm so sorry. And like, I just can't imagine Trump doing something like that. It's not in his personality. But it's something,
that's your problem, buddy.
Exactly. But it's like something that Vance can do at will. And and I think the idea of having a highly polished, well-educated person who can quote philosophers and like show human emotions, but also adopts Trumpian style worldview on things like immigration and nationalism, that could actually end up being an extremely effective. And also, he's a millennial. He can like go on any podcast in the world and talk to them for like 5 hours. If you go to his Joe Rogan appearance, the most shocking thing was if you went through all the comments, everyone was like, I heard this guy was a weirdo, but he sounds like the most normal person I ever heard in my life.
Right.
If somebody like that is in control of a presidential campaign, he has all the spotlight on him to craft the messaging the way he wants to. I actually think he could be a very effective candidate. Of course, I think Trump will hold him back. If Trump's presidency ends up being a disaster, he craters the economy, blah, 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 it will hurt Vance naturally. But as a candidate, he actually has a lot of strengths. And that's part of why I think the Democrats can't just phone in the C team, right? And just say, well, we just go with whoever's hot at the moment. No, I think you need a stress-tested primary, just like in 2008, where you let the highest quality, where everyone rips each other apart and let the highest quality person rise to the top. That's how you face off with someone against someone like J.D. Vance, in my view. So,
well, that does bring up the question then: who might that person or persons be? Who's the potential A team for the Democrats there to face off against someone like Vance?
I mean, I think it would be like foolish for me to try to predict who could get to that spot this far out in advance.
Right, but who is a representative sample? Kind of.
Well, that being said, though, I do have some biases on, like some thoughts on this. It's only biases. Like, I don't think the Democrats should gravitate towards the coasts anymore. I think that's kind of just like it would be like a suicidal idea to nominate someone like Gavin Newsom, who his state will turn to a whipping post. I don't think California's problem.
Baby. Shoot me now.
I don't think the California's problems are going to be solved in 4 years. I also think that, like, Ocasio-Cortez excites a lot of people, but like I think that she's adopted some extreme positions over the years that she just doesn't have time to walk back. It would be like Kamala Redux in that case. They would show the video of her with Abraham Kennedy talking about police abolition. It's just like, it's over. Oh, yeah. It's not a good idea. But I think the Democratic Party is going to have to gravitate towards the Sun Belt in many ways, because if you look at the population trends in the United States, so I think someone wrote that, like, by 2032, like, you basically cannot win a presidential election unless you pick up like Georgia and Arizona and so on and so forth. And so it may be worth taking a serious look at the two senators who represent my state. I think Ossoff is slightly more politically savvy than Warnock if you had to choose between the two. Although I don't know if Democrats would want to do that unless they won the governor's race in Georgia, because then they could replace the senator with a Democrat immediately. But I think they would be strong candidates. They both have strengths. I think progressives have been frustrated at not being able to win Southern primaries for a lot. I think like they could actually go a long way towards solving that problem for them, because they are Southerners and they would have a lot of appeal. A lot of people like them here. I think someone like Josh Shapiro, if he can figure out a way to prove himself as not a regional candidate but a national candidate, I think is a very good speaker.
He's a bit cautious? I mean, he seems quite cautious to me.
Yeah, he is cautious, and also I don't think he engages enough on national stuff for me to really tell like how he would be in that arena. I don't know as much about Gallego.
He's been making some interesting moves lately.
He has some promising aspects, I think. I don't know. I think someone from the Sun Belt, even the Midwest, might be passé at this point. I don't know. Like the population shifts and the political shifts might mean that looking towards the southern part of the country is a smarter move for Democrats.
Well, on Gallego, Zed, did you look at the sort of policy? It's not exactly a paper; it's almost more of a PowerPoint presentation. But anyway, on the immigration issue, I mean, he's probably gone farther than any other prominent Democrat in terms of basically saying we completely screwed this up. Almost everything we did was wrong. The asylum system completely broken. We can't put up with this stuff anymore. It's completely unacceptable. So, I mean, other candidates or Democrats have hinted at that, but this was a much more forthright, denunciation of what has been done, and willingness to transgress the immigration groups in terms of what he's recommending.
Right. And I think the Democrats do have to neutralize that issue. Not just the Democrats, by the way. This is an issue across the Western world. Like center-left governments across the Western world have tripped up on immigration so much.
I mean,
and
look at
capitalized
the UK,
on by
look
the
at
right
Germany
and the far right.
now. Yeah, I mean,
yes. The AfD should not be polling well in Germany, of all places. Right? A political party that has that kind of roots and
the most popular party in Germany at this point.
Right. So they do have to neutralize that issue. I do think all the people that we just discussed, though, could do it. Gallego is interesting because he represents Arizona, which obviously has border state roots. it has to be top of the menu to neutralize it, because I think what happened in 21 was a lot of people were like, okay, Trump separated families. He got really unpopular in immigration. Screw him. Democrat, America's really on our side on this issue, so we can do whatever we want, right? It's not really.
Wrong.
No. It's like this issue is very thermostatic. Americans are very sensitive to this idea that like I don't think most Americans are against immigration, but they are against this idea. They're against this idea that like people are not following the law. People are not following the rules. Things are being overwhelmed. It's chaotic. They don't like that. So like Democrats at the very least have to like neutralize that part of it. They don't have to turn against immigration overall or like, become one of those, we can't have diversity in this country, we that kind of thing. But they do have to be like, it has to be orderly. And I think to some extent we are seeing that in parts of Europe now. Like I think Starmer is doing that, United Kingdom. I don't know how it'll turn out for him, but I think he's trying to deflate the right.
More a statement than an action at this point, but at least he said it.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. I mean, I think that it's difficult. I think that also maybe the Canadians are trying to move in that direction as well. Because I think with the Canadians, it actually became residents of Indian origin. I think a massive number of them started applying for asylum. And it's like, well, not that many people in India are like war refugees or anything, right? Like it's not.
No problem.
Most of those asylum cases were probably exploiting their system as well. So like, I think all the Western democracies have to deal with this. And yeah, I think, look, it's going to be very easy temptation for Democrats to overcorrect and be like, Trump is so extreme. No, Statue of Liberty says welcome immigrants. We're going to welcome in immigrants. And like,
which, as you say, kind of what happened in 2021.
I imagine like the left wing of the party is going to try to do that. And I think going to something like, I don't know, like my Senator Ossoff, who I know fairly well, he, since he was running for the first time, I think he's crafted out an interesting spot on this because he was criticizing the Biden administration about immigration a little bit. He said, look, the asylum system is not good, the border is not good, and he would in hearings and stuff. At the same time, he's saying, look, Trump is deporting people for speech. That's not right. We can't do it without hearings or habeas corpus. Like these are all very important things. Right. He's getting a good middle ground. I think Diego's trying to do the same thing. But the way the inertia of the party has to be on that kind of approach, though, right? I think it's very easy for it to get to the left of that, or
it's pretty really hard, right?
Yeah, or really not even to the left, to the libertarian, I should say, right? Like a libertarian approach is very easy because the left used to be very skeptical of loose labor markets, open borders. I mean, Bernie Sanders, Ezra Klein, and we all remember when he ran the first time, argued with Ezra about open borders. That's a Koch
brothers proposal, man. I can't be for that. Yeah.
But that was, I think you're absolutely right. That is the number one issue they're going to have to neutralize going forward because it's something that's going to be flipped on them. Another issue is and I remember telling you this, I was shocked at how resonating the transgender issues have become, right?
Yes.
I think if you're like a middle-class woman in like the suburbs of Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, it does kind of freak you out. And it's not a matter of like you go around every day of your life thinking about transgender people or you're obsessed. I mean, there are people like that online and stuff who are pundits who are like that, but like it just demonstrates that like, okay, why can't Democrats like understand something very simple that like it's unfair when people are like, when people who are born as men are playing in the women's sports, right? Like it's unfair and it's weird, right? Like it's not typical. And I think I remember seeing this in Georgia, which is that there were some votes in the legislature on this issue, and they were almost entirely polarized, right? Like all the Republicans were like, we got to ban everything women's sports, and the Democrats were on the other side of it. And I was just like, it's weird. Like even in the South. Southern Democrats who are dealing with socially, culturally conservative constituents in many cases will not moderate on that issue.
Right. They couldn't take the 80 side of an 80-20 issue, which is, I mean, to my mind, I agree. The immigration thing is absolutely central in terms of Democrats repositioning themselves. But I do think you're right that the so-called trans rights issue is quite huge as well in terms of what it symbolizes to people about how clueless the Democrats are and how much they depart from common sense.
And I think this is something where some of the center-left parties in other places of the world already moderated on and already kind of neutralized it, right? Like, I think in parts of the UK or some of the Nordic countries, like they were like, well, we understand gender dysphoria as an issue with some children, but like we can't rush them off to like taking hormones and things like that, right? Like that could be potentially dangerous for them.
We're still really far away from that here. I mean, it's such a third rail still within the Democratic Party. I mean, look what happened to Seth Moulton in Massachusetts.
Yes.
Look, when the bill came up in Congress, protection of women and girls in sports, they got 2 Democratic votes in the House and 0 in this. Well, they basically voted to kill it.
Someone was telling me, like, are you saying we should compromise on basic human rights? And I'm like, look, like, it's not like transgender people don't need, Medicaid, or like they don't need a higher minimum wage. They don't need public.
They should not be discriminated against. That's, they have civil rights like the rest of us.
Well, the thing is, though, like, if you can't even win the election in the first place, those people are going to be much worse off. Because like, they benefit from Democratic policy too, don't they? Theoretically, that's the case for your political party. So like, I don't know. I think that when I was growing up, the issue for Democrats was often like gay marriage or something, right? And I felt like in the Democratic Party at that time, you had a large variety of views on that, right? Like people in the coastal states were full on for gay marriage. If you were in Georgia, like I was, most of the Democrats would be like, okay, we're for civil unions, which gives you all the same rights, but we won't call it marriage. But like that to me was a sign of a healthy political party because they had a diversity of views based on where they were, their constituents are. Like, that's democracy, right? Like not everyone has one point of view. For some reason, when it came to a lot of these social cultural issues, that has disappeared in the Democratic Party. Yeah, it's become so nationalized. It's become so nationalized that everyone's just on the same page. But the people themselves have not become nationalized, right? Like people in Georgia still don't, most of them, like probably 70-80% of them still are not going to support biological man being on track and field team in women's sports, right? Like, but the party that's supposed to represent them, just, I don't know. They, for some reason, they get their point of view on this from MSNBC or Twitter or something, but they don't get it from talking to the people they represent, right? Which is, it's very easy cheat code to figuring out where they stand, right? But
speaking of the people of Georgia, Zaid, tell us about the project you're engaged on with New America. This is to look at polarization and what people really think and how they discuss things in Georgia. What's that about?
Yeah. So New America Foundation is doing. It's called US at 250. So the 250th anniversary of the founding of the country, it will be in 2026. So they have a series of projects for this. And my project for this year cohort of fellows was they went to journalists all over America. And basically they said, look, we want you guys to write a long form article about how your region of the country is changing, how it's changing socially, politically, culturally, the division, so on and so forth. So yeah, my project is basically about Metro Atlanta because I think everybody knows Atlanta has been a Democratic hub. They call it the Black Mecca for many years, city too busy to hate. But to me, the real story of Georgia is the metro area, right? Counties that used to be represented by Newt Gingrich, Bob Barr, Tom Price are now Democratic counties, right? They go to Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. There are counties that resisted segregation or integration through the 1980s that now are like a third minority and they're like growing rapidly thanks to all the immigrants, right? So my job was basically to go around to these places, talk to people, like understand them, like what's life like here now? Like how are things changing? What isn't changing, right? And so yeah, I have a lot of cool little stories in that I'm putting together. I'm working I think I'm gonna get done with the next month. I've been working on it over the year, trying to paste them together into a long form article. But like to me, the really cool thing about Georgia is that it's not really a red state anymore. But it's not a blue state. It's really it's an interesting mix of both things that are kind of in between. And yeah, I'm just trying to get that out, trying to explain that out to the rest of the country in this piece, because I feel like I'm always hit with stereotypes about the state from people abroad, right? It used to be like Georgia's this redneck state, you're all racist. That you probably still hear that a lot. I think after Biden won the state, people are like, "Oh, it's a blue state now; it's progressive." I'm like, no, it's really not. It's really not progressive. But it's a very, it's a very mixed state. I mean, to give you an anecdote about this, I remember one day I saw a car with a bumper sticker. One was the Confederate flag, which, okay, I've seen a million of those growing up. Right next to it was free Leonard Peltier, who was the Native American activist who finally, I think, didn't get a full pardon. I think he got a commutation or something from Biden. But he was like a massive left-wing cause for so many years, right?
I remember. Yeah.
But like you will meet people who have those kinds of, or you'll meet like Democrats who absolutely love guns, or Republicans who drive EVs. Like there's just a lot of those types of people in Georgia now because of largely, I would say, demographic factors, right? Like minorities having more kids, a lot of people moving to the state from like California, New Jersey, New York, because we're more affordable in those places. And yeah, this is just creates such an interesting mix of people. And so the goal of my piece is really to try to explain that out, explain the political orientation of the state. which honestly I think you can only do in a long form article because it's kind of hard to just like put a bumper sticker on it or a slogan and say that's what it is now. It's like it's a really eclectic kind of mix of people now.
Well, when can we hope to see this then, Zed? Is it?
Yeah, I'm hoping to get it done in the next month. There wasn't a super firm like time limit on how long fellows had to do this, but I've done most of the reporting now, so I'm just working on the writing stage. So
okay, so when it's done, they would publish it, or would they hold it to 2026?
No, first we're gonna get it published in a publisher of our choice, which I'm working on, and then what they're gonna do is they're gonna put it together in a compendium with all the other articles on their site. So I think it will be sometime this year they'll put it up like that.
Cool.
So yeah,
cool.
I don't
That's
think
something to look forward to. Well, Zed, if you would be interested in, I mean, you have other outlets, but Liberal Patriot would always welcome contributions from you along these lines. And I'm personally very interested in the state of Georgia because it is so fascinating.
Oh yeah.
So, okay, well, maybe we'll just end there. We've got something to look forward to from the Zaid Jilani journalistic factory as you continue to churn out great stuff. I urge everybody to subscribe to Zaid's Substack, The American Saga. I really can't recommend it highly enough, and keep your eye out for other pieces that Zaid puts out. And of course, this Georgia thing that's coming up. And Zaid, I'll extend my usual invitation to my guests. If you're in DC area, please come by. I'll buy you lunch at AEI, and we can chew the fat about all kinds of things. So thanks again for being on the Liberal Patriot.
Yeah, it was great to be here, Roy.